Hello, dear friends. We are here now after the fast of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day where we mourn the two temples and other things that happen on this day. And I'd like to talk about the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, whose first portion we read last Shabbat, portion of Devarim. And a few ideas I'd like to take from this first portion of the book of Devarim, which says a lot about the book itself. Remember the beginning of the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. Moses is talking, and he's giving his last drasha, his last sermon, his last lecture to the people of Israel. When is he doing it? In his 40th year in the desert with them. That means that he must be around 120, because he was 80 when they went to Pharaoh. So these are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel. And it said, list all the places. And then this was Achar Asar Yomi Chorev. This was 11 days after they left Chorev, in the 40th year. In the 11th month, Ashtei Asar Chodesh, in the first of that month, the 11th month is Shvat, the first of the month of Shvat. So, now we know that Moses passes away in that 40th year at the age of 120 on the 7th day of Adar. So all this is happening. All this is happening, when Moshe is less than 1 month before his passing. And this is said over a number of weeks, this book of Devarim. And he says that after he conquered the land of Sichon and Og, the Amorite kings. And he starts off by saying, God spoke to us at Chorev. Remember, it says they're only 11 days away. God spoke to us at Chorev, saying it's enough to go to circle this mountain, start to go. They circled that mountain for quite a while. Now I want you to go towards the Amorite and all of their neighbors, and through the flatlands, and all the way to the beaches of the land of Israel, which is that time the land of the Canaanites, all the way to the Euphrates in the Lebanon. Look, I have given you the land. Take it over, because I promised your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them this land and to give it for their children. So Moses is saying, God told us at Chorev, it's Sinai. Chorev is another name for the Mount of Sinai. That's the way most of the commentators explain it, Rashi, Ramban. And he said to us, go to the land. Now, we know it's going to take a long time because you had the spies, and because of the spies, it was dragged out for 40 years, even though it could have been quicker. But the goal is to get to the land. Why is the goal to get to the land? Because that's where everything comes together. The Torah is more understandable when you're in the land because it's built for a people in their land. We were miraculously able to survive 2,000 years of exile and 70 years before that, but the Torah was built to be a nation in its land in order to be inspire all the nations of the earth. See that a nation in its land can also believe in an ethical system, the belief in God, and it can work even in the realpolitik world. So that's the first thing we see from Moses. Right away, he connects the giving of the Torah to the land. I have to thank Rabbi Chadad from here in Katamon from pointing that out to me last Friday. The second thing is that Moses says here is that it says also here, in the Transjordan area, in the area of Moab, Moses starting explaining the Torah. Moses is starting to explain the Torah in the 40th year. What did he do all the other years? The answer is very simple. Moses was explaining the Torah from day one, but this was a new generation. Remember, as they're coming to the land, the old generation died out, except for very few people, like Joshua and Caleb, who were the good spies. But the older generation died out. There's a new generation. He has to reinterpret the Torah for them, for the new generation. He might be an old man, but he still got it, and he has no other choice. Every generation needs a new interpretation of the Torah. They have to understand how it fits into their lives. But before he does that, the whole Parshat Devarim, the whole portion of part 1 of Deuteronomy, of Devarim, is all just going over the history of what happened. Because a people who doesn't know its history is going to lose direction. If you know where you're coming from, it's easier to know where you're going. And he has to explain, the first thing he has to tell this new generation, how they got there and what happened. What happened with those spies? What happened with the Sichon and Amori? Why did they have to fight them? Let's get this straight. What was your history until you got here? And why did you get here? And why did God keep you in the wilderness for 40 years? All this Moshe wants to tell them firsthand. So a lot of them don't know. It's a new generation. So there are really 3 points which are coming out here very significantly. Number 1, Moses right away is connecting giving of the Torah with coming into the land, because they're about to come into the land. And they have to realize that it's all coming together at this point. They have this chance. Number 2, he's telling them how he put together judges and how this happened, how that happened, and the spy story and why they got stuck in the desert for 40 years. And again, he reiterates with the spy story. What was the problem? And in this issue, it's a lack of faith between you and God. God said, just go into the land, and there was a lack of faith. And those 10 spies showed that lack of faith because they were leaders of tribes. And they were afraid. And a generation who is afraid are not ready. So not only Moses tells them to go in the land, but he says the only way you're going to make it in the land if you believe in God's promise and you move forward, because your parents' generation did not know how to do that. And he tells them the history. He wants them to know everything that happened, firsthand from him, from the leader who lived through it. And he even says, Rav lachem sovet har hazeh. Because not only did they go around Har Chorev, they went around Har Seir. There were places where they stayed for a very long time just to let that generation die out in the desert. That's why it took 40 years. Didn't have to. And then what I see is the most important verse. Ho'il Moshe be'eret haTorah hazot. Moses is going to reinterpret the Torah. It's a new generation. They need a new interpretation. What is a new interpretation? Well, just off the cuff, I can say a few things about Devarim. In the book of Devarim, Moses says certain things which were not said in the other 4 books of the Torah. I'll just give one example off the cuff, which we'll see a little bit later. I think it's in Akev. In the book of, in the previous books, when it talked about the manna, Torah says the man tasted like honey. Tzapichit bidvash. The Midrash says you could taste any fruit from the man. And it sounds like the people were just ungrateful. They said, Manu, what is this? Bilti elamane nenu, oh, we could only eat this man. It wasn't satiating, so they asked for meat. And they were punished for all these things. Why are you asking for meat? What's wrong with the manna? In Devarim, for the first time, Moses spills the beans. And he says to them that during this time in the desert, God tested you, he afflicted you, and he starved you. And he made you eat the manna that you didn't know and your ancestor didn't know. In order to teach you that man does not live on bread alone. Oh, didn't say that anywhere in the 4 books before. not in Exodus, not in Bamidbar. Turns out that the manna was not easy to eat. It was healthy. They felt good, but they didn't feel like they had a meal. It didn't feel like they were satiated and had enjoyed a meal. It's not an easy thing. Moshe says for the first time in the Torah, you're right, it was a test, it was not easy. There are other things he says too, where we can also see what I call spilling the beans. It's also interesting how he teaches for the new generation things which he thinks are important. When he rehashes the Torah, somebody pointed out the sacrificial service of the temple is not mentioned in Devarim. That's not what he wanted to stress in his last talk. Which is interesting. Does it reflect on the argument between Maimonides and Nachmanides, whether it's a means to an end or an end within self? Interesting to reflect on. But the point is, he wants to emphasize the Torah values and not going into so much sin and penitence and this aspect. There are other things too. But the point is, he's teaching these laws to the generation which are going to enter the land of Israel. And how does he end off? He ends off by introducing them to Joshua, the one who was appointed, because he's the one who's going to lead you into the land. Don't fear the nations there, because God is with you to fight the battle. Not only, if you want to put it, this is the fourth thing. Moses is a great leader, but a great leader needs somebody that he can nurture and develop to take his place, because nobody lives forever. And Moses had the insight to know that. He also picked a man who had a different relationship to people than him, because he knew that he was a bit aloof for the people, not on purpose. It was just the way he was, his character. So he wanted a little bit somebody who's closer to the people in their thinking, a Joshua, so they could relate to easy. So Moses understood. He knew how to update the Torah, meaning the explanation of the Torah. You don't have to change the laws, but you have to give those insights, which are the insights for the new generation. If you want to win them over, you have to speak their language. Moses knew how to speak their language, but he also knew that Joshua was the one who had to take them in. So you have wonderful little ideas here that you can already see just from the beginning of the book. Moses tells them, number one, God made it very clear at Horeb, the goal is to go to the land. So now that you're going to be entering the land, this is where everything comes together. But you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to fight the enemies there. It doesn't come on a silver spoon. But don't worry, God will fight for you. Don't make the mistake of the previous generation who had a lack of faith in God's taking them to the land. Believe in it. It will happen, I promise you. Because God made his promise to fight with you in the battle over this land. And then Moses tells them the history, because a nation who doesn't know its past will also not know its future. It'll help you in your direction. And then he says to them, he gives them this new interpretation of the Torah, which is Devarim. And I say new interpretation is just the nuances. He goes over the major points, but adds certain things for this generation, which he feels it's important for them to know. And then he tells them, I'm training Joshua. He's going to take you in. He's been working with me before. He's the man who'll be able to cross that Jordan with you and help beat your enemies. Look up to him as a leader. He will learn from you and you will learn from him. And this is the book of Devarim. And there are many things from this book of Devarim which the leadership in our generation can learn from, both the rabbinic and the political leadership too. Shalom, shalom, shalom al Yisrael.